All right, this is the fourth and final video on evolution. So let's go straight to the objective. Discuss speciation and extinction. These are two big vocabulary words that you're going to need to know. Extinction, you pretty well all understand, but speciation, you're going to find out about. Speciation is the evolution of a new species through time. It just means that's the process by which we get a new species. And when you consider the millions of species of organisms that we have, it's quite remarkable on how this happens. This usually happens more quickly in a small population. So if you have an isolated population without a whole lot, when I say a whole lot, we're talking about, thousands. We're not talking about millions. We're not talking about dozens. But a small population, you'll be able to see the genetic traits that allow for adaptation and for survival to be much more pronounced. Sometimes they can be caused by geographical or ecological isolation. We talked about how you can see these new species come through mutations if they're small and they're isolated from the last video that I did. Okay, and fossil records indicate that for some reason, sometimes the species will remain stable for millions of years. In other words, there is very little genetic change. And then all of a sudden, that may disappear or it may change rapidly, usually because of geological and ecological circumstances. Earthquakes, volcanoes, meteors or asteroids hitting the Earth, changes in global warming, ice ages, those kinds of things. So if you look at this speciation video, you can see you've got this assortment of different colored bugs. And they become separated. And as they continue to be separated, depending on the circumstances, they can evolve into two separate species. One much greener in color and one a reddish, brownish, tan color. And you need to understand that when they become a totally separate species, they're no longer able to mate with one another. All right, so if the new river suddenly separated them, over time you're going to see this separation. So there we go. This is an example of the Arctic hare. It's adapted to come up with a white coat, and sometimes in the summer it'll change to a browner coat so that it blends in better. And here's a jackrabbit that you find in Utah and throughout the desert Southwest that helps it to blend in. Obviously, if it blends in, it has a greater chance of survival than if it stands out. Now we have artificial speciation. You have to understand, of the thousands of species of dogs we have, they all came from the wolf. Whether you have a Chihuahua or whether you have a Great Dane. And we have done this by breeding them specifically based on the traits that they have. So artificial speciation means a new species developed by man. We're not talking about manipulating the DNA in a test tube. We're talking about what man has been doing for thousands of years. Sometimes we can do intentional mutations. We can change the genes and see what we get, hoping that we'll get something better. And we can also do crossbreeding. Everybody understands if you cross a Pekingese with a poodle, you get a Peekapoo. And there's many different kinds of crossbreeds that we like for whatever reason. One of the reasons people like to have mixes of poodles and they don't like pure poodles is because poodles don't have fur. They have hair. And as a result, they don't have the dander that dogs have that makes people allergic. And of course, we can do genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is something that we've done to make certain types of crops more drought resistant or more resistant to different kinds of insects and other pests. So here we go. It's what happens when you cross a great white shark and a sparrow. That, of course, is just doesn't make a lot of sense, and a little photoshopping allows that to occur. Let's talk about extinction. And in particular, we're going to talk about the extinction of the dodo bird. But basically what happens is when a species can no longer survive. Whatever the mechanism they have that has allowed them to survive so far changes. And that is the case of the dodo bird. They used to live on this island, and what happened is that when man came in, they really didn't have any enemies. And they either got chopped up by airplanes that landed there, or dogs, or whatever else, and eventually they went extinct. Sometimes you hear the phrase dumb as a dodo, because they didn't know well enough to save themselves, and so they went extinct. We've had all kinds of mass extinction events. Some people say we're in the 5th mass extinction event, and my personal opinion is I concur. Every day we are having half a dozen or so species become extinct. Now, in some cases, it's not very noticeable, whether it's a certain type of worm or a certain type of ant or a certain type of plant that goes extinct. We tend to focus in on the bigger animals. We tend to focus on polar bears and pandas and Bengal tigers and those sorts of things. And you will be having an assignment where you're going to be coming up with your own presentation on endangered or extinct species. So anyway, this concludes the PowerPoint on extinction. We want to minimize how many more dodo birds there are. Okay, I guess I should have clicked on this some more. But it was first noticed in 1600, and you saw that picture earlier, that island off the coast of Africa, not terribly far from Madagascar. And 80 years after it was discovered, it didn't survive because of man's footprint.